And joining us now is Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party, seeking personal election in Central Nova. Welcome to TVO.
Thanks again, Steve.
It's
great to be back.
Well, I know everybody's very interested in hearing you talk about the debate.
Yes.
And we are going to get to that. And you are participating this time.
Yes.
But we do want to spend a few minutes dealing with this issue that has kind of created a bit of a firestorm among political reporters on the blogosphere and give you a chance to deal with it.
And you and I are principals. And it all happened here on TVO, The Agenda.
That is true. It happened in February 2007 at the Munk Center for International Studies at the U of T. We were talking about the environment, surprise, surprise, and here was the exchange. Michael, roll tape.
This is a two-parter. First of all, if all of you seem to agree that environmental costs need to be internalized and a carbon tax is one way of doing that, why is there so little political will for a carbon tax? That's the first part.
Hang on, let's get an answer to that. Why so little will? Elizabeth?
All politicians are scared to death to mention the word tax, and they think Canadians are stupid and cannot, and I fundamentally agree with that assessment, but most politicians think that if you say we're going to put on a carbon tax and reduce your income tax, they don't think they can sell it. It's all about votes.
And particularly regionally, it's become a boo word in Alberta.
Okay, that was the exchange. Let's just clarify here what you did and did not say.
Right.
Because some people thought you said, I think the Canadian public is stupid.
Which I obviously wouldn't have ever said and didn't say. What I said was, I said the reason that there's no political will is that the other political parties think that Canadians are stupid, and I fundamentally disagree with that assessment. And you do as you explain it, you go forward, and people will accept it.
Okay, but I thought I heard you say I fundamentally agree with that
No,
assessment.
I know it's funny how it sounds, but I fundamentally disagree with that assessment. So it's my problem of talking too fast.
You do talk quickly.
I do talk quickly, but if you look at my lifetime record as from my first book published in early 1980 actually, all the way through my writings, it's a constant plea that democracy works, that the electorate is responsible, intelligent, and should be engaged, that people must shake off cynicism and apathy and get involved, and that Canadians and the voting public of every electorate in every democracy are far more intelligent and far more able to accept a complicated solution than most politicians will give them credit for.
You know what? You're speaking more slowly now than I've ever heard you speak
Well,
in your life.
I'm
You're trying to make
learning.
sure. You're trying to. I can tell this. You're trying to make sure you
Because what happens is I do have a tendency to talk fairly quickly, and I can remember we taped the segment on the Munk Center.
And it was live, actually.
Yeah. Oh, but I watched it on TV later.
Right. We did it live at 8 o'clock, and then you watched it later at 11.
So I watched it later at 11 to see how it was, and I watched it and thought, oh, what happened there? And I remember the beginning of when I'm talking, the mic wasn't on, and then it came to me, and it ended up raising the volume on one part of my sentence, and somebody else said something, so I was fundamentally disagreeing with that assessment, but turning away. So the way it all worked out, what I could swear on a stack of Bibles, and if anyone watches it, they can see. Plus, the audience at the time understood what I was saying. I was sitting next to John Duffy, and Andrew Coyne was down the other end, and you were there. And if I had ever said in front of a room full of anybody that I thought Canadians were stupid, I don't think that that would have passed without comment. So people at the time and in the moment understood what I had just said, but with the lifting the quote out of context, the putting it on a blog site and alleging that I'd said that, it's created a bit of a firestorm, but anyone who watched my speech at the launch of the campaign on Sunday morning knows that my firm and passionate commitment is to be of service to people in this country and convince them that democracy works. They must vote and get engaged.
Okay, but now that you're at the debate, you're one of the 5 main players in this country. So you're going to get the kind of treatment that the other 4 leaders have traditionally gotten.
Is great.
Okay, to that end, Ryan Sparrow of the Conservative Party had to resign, or they've got fired, one of the two, suspended, whatever word they're using, from his job because of some stuff that happened in the back rooms that the leader of the party, Stephen Harper, thought was antithetical to him. Your guy, Mr. Bennett, today threatened to sue a blogger for his interpretation of the quote, and then took it back and apologized. Are you going to suspend him or do anything?
Of course not. Yeah. And I don't think they should have suspended Ryan Sparrow. I know Ryan. I felt terrible for him. The thing is, Mr. Harper has these spokespeople, and he wants them to be out there and trained as pit bulls. And if they bite the wrong person, they suddenly get suspended. He's been a hard-working person in the conservative. The father of the deceased serviceman who'd spoken out also said people make mistakes. You don't have to fire him.
He did accept his apology and
moved on. And I think that's the right thing. We certainly would never ask somebody to. We'd never threaten to sue anybody over things that they say. I believe in free speech. And John apologized immediately. So it was one of those, again, in the news cycle of an election campaign, they say a week is a lifetime in politics. A day is approximating a month, I find. And things that are news stories at 10 a.m. are gone by 4. So I won't worry about it.
I don't know if you're reading Dan Burrill anymore, your former advisor, but he has a fairly toughly worded few blog posts out about you now, and he calls you your own worst enemy. And I wonder whether you feel the need. You've always been a very dynamic, engaging, kind of shoot from the hip, you know, just tell it like it is kind of person. I wonder now whether, because you're going to get the same kind of treatment as the other leaders, you feel a need to kind of play by the rules and tone it down a bit.
I've always played by the rules.
You know what I mean by that, though.
No, I'm not going to be someone I'm not. I'm not going to go through a makeover or have handlers tell me what I can say and what I can't say. I think that the thing that is attracting people to the Green Party is that all of our candidates speak from their heart. Everybody who's running. The only advice I've ever given our candidates, because we've had candidate training sessions, and they say, what, you know, do you want us to stay on message? What is it you want us to do? How do you want us to react? I said, be yourselves.
Okay, you do remember on that Monk Center show that I once asked you, do you want to put Hummer drivers in jail? And you said, no, they ought to be taken out back and shot. You did say that too, you know.
Well, there's my Sarah Palin, the inner person coming in. No,
Oh.
I have an approach that I think Canadians can appreciate humor.
Can you say that kind of thing anymore, though?
Oh, I don't think I would say it now. But the point is that I don't think there's anything wrong in not taking yourself too seriously. I think that's the important thing.
And you're ready for prime time?
Oh, you bet.
Here's Andrew Coyne in Maclean's magazine not too very long ago. The sight of the Green Party leader in the debates is going to give them instant legitimacy of a kind they have never had before. A whole lot of people who had previously never considered voting Green are going to give them a thought. I don't mean that everyone's going to see Elizabeth May and be blown away by her. I agree with those pundits who say she might turn off as many people as she turns on. But just by standing on the stage, sitting actually, with the other leaders, she and her party ascend to a whole new level. We are no longer in a 3- or 4-party system. We are now, and for the foreseeable future, in a 5-party system. Why do you think you ultimately got to participate in this debate, which you had been blocked from twice in the past?
Well, I've never been blocked before because this is my first national election as leader of the Green Party. The Green Party has been building steadily. I mean, the party's 25 years old. I was saying, you know, we're a party that's, you know, struggled along for 25 years to achieve our overnight success. But we're now poised. We've built nationally across the country. When Jim Harris, former leader, was told he couldn't participate in the debates, there were a couple reasons put forward. One was that although we were running candidates in every riding, we're a truly national party and had achieved the level of support to receive financing through the federal system for elections. We didn't have a member in the House of Commons. And the other criteria he was informed of was that we weren't a factor between elections, that you sort of had the Green Party pop up when the writ dropped, and then in the political life of the country weren't playing a role. And knowing that, of course, when I became leader of the Green Party, I set out to make sure that there were none of those criteria in our way so that I could participate. So I think you'll agree, we've been much more engaged in the political life of the country.
Still haven't elected anybody.
Well, but Blair Wilson is now
a
member of Parliament at the point of dissolution of the House, came as an independent to us. But bear in mind that when Preston Manning was allowed on the debates, he had one MP, albeit elected, but he wasn't running anyone anywhere east of Manitoba, and the Bloc Québécois only running in Quebec, all of their members of Parliament, the first time that Lucien Bouchard took place, had been elected under other banners.
Okay,
one of
the things
we're in the debates now, and I think it's fair, so I don't think we should have ever been excluded. The reason that we're in now, despite the fact that Mr. Harper and Mr. Layton tried to stop us through the backroom threat that they wouldn't participate, is entirely due to the citizens of Canada finding it unfair. They're not all Greens, the people who protested, but they do have a fundamental sense of fairness, and that was offended.
Which spoke to the anti-democratic comment that you
Yes.
made. You felt it was anti-democratic to stay out of it. You also said the decision to keep you out was sexist.
No, I never said that.
Well, I've seen that quoted. Was that not an accurate quote?
What I said was that what they had failed to examine, I described as the old boys club keeping out the only woman. Now that was interpreted as though I'd said it was sexist. What I really meant by it is, look, in a time when every party claims to want to have more women engaged in politics, surely the fact that they were excluding the only woman leader of a federal political party should have occurred to them that they were missing an opportunity, not just in fairness, but to promote the role of women in politics, to encourage our daughters and young women to see a woman on the stage taking on all these men and think, I could do that. So I felt that what they'd missed was the spirit of change that we've been so focused on in the US election between Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin, that to exclude me when the party had passed every other hurdle, and yet they were going to use this closed-door back room, Harper and Leighton making threats not to appear, to exclude the only woman. It struck me they'd missed an enormous opportunity, and the YWCA agreed with me on that.
Let me ask you one more sort of politics question here before we get into some issues. You want to defeat Stephen Harper. Let me ask you the Ralph Nader question. Won't you hate yourself if by running you end up splitting votes that otherwise might go or might sort of circulate into one party which would have a better chance of beating him?
Yeah, you've mentioned the Nader thing, and I can tell you, I'll share with you, Steve, I went through soul searching when I was trying to decide if I should seek Green Party leadership. I was so devastated by the 2006 election campaign, both that Harper and Leighton chose to bring down the government of Canada on the opening day of the UN Climate Conference, thus imperiling the conference's success, and at the same time making sure that the Canadian public didn't know what had just happened in Montreal at the climate conference. It didn't play a role. Kyoto was ignored in the election campaign. So I watched that unfold with a great sense of despair, because I could see that with Harper's election, we'd see 20 years of environmental progress reversed. And in thinking about running for leadership of the Green Party, which many people were urging me to do, I thought about Nader long and hard, and I realized the only mistake that I could fault Ralph Nader for was saying to the U.S. public, there's no difference between Al Gore and George Bush.
But
there's
there is
no
here.
difference. Well, can we possibly say that Al Gore and George Bush, that there was really no difference? One has just taken the U.S. through the worst 8 years of its existence, the worst president in history, turned surpluses into deficits, taken them into an illegal war in Iraq. The other now has the Nobel Peace Prize.
So that's a ridiculous thing to say.
Ralph Nader was wrong to say that. And that's why I'm being attacked as somehow a closet liberal, because I will not try to pull the wool over Canadians' eyes and say that either that the Green Party is the only good party, nor will I say there's no difference between Harper and Dion. There is a huge difference.
Well, let me follow up on that. You know, one of the reasons Mr. Harper wanted to keep you out of the debate was that he said you basically share the same platform as Stéphane Dion, and he doesn't need to compete against two liberals. So let's talk issues. How is your environmental plan any different, and I presume you think better, from Stéphane Dion's?
First, let me say that while Mr. Harper may have said that, it's important on the record that we now know that he first threatened the consortium that he would not appear on the stage if I was included, well before there was any discussion of leaders' courtesy between Mr. Dion and me, and well before the Liberals adopted our policy of tax shifting.
That's according to Tony Berman.
According to Tony Berman, who was, in fact, the chair of the consortium at the relevant time and speaks from personal knowledge. So, how do our policies differ? Not just environmental policies, but right across the board, and particularly our policies on trade arrangements, NAFTA, our policies on the security and prosperity partnership. Those are all completely different from the Liberals. The fact of the matter is that the Liberals have adopted one of our key planks. So, of course, it's similar. It was our plank. And I think it's important that we have the kind of discussion of the best approach to reduce greenhouse gases framed by the scientific case that we must reduce them far more rapidly and far more urgently than any of the other parties are now discussing. And it's certainly Mr. Harper's approach, which is to set targets for a distant date where the targets themselves are dangerously high, and his plan has no hope of getting us there.
I get that.
Okay.
People see this distinction between you and the Conservatives. I don't think there's any question there. The question is, how different are you from the Liberals? If you're a voter and you're wondering, do I go for Dion or do I go for May, why do they go for you?
Well, if they're concerned about other issues, but the climate change issue, let's just make that, since you did ask me about that, I should answer. The Dion tax shift plan is in concept the same as ours. In the particulars, ours is different. We want to start with a $50 a ton carbon tax, which is the level recommended by the Stern report from Sir Nicholas Stern, former senior economist to the World Bank. $50 a ton moving up. Dion's plan starts at $10 a ton moving up. Our plan will cut income taxes and allow income splitting for middle-class families. We are the only party promoting income splitting as a tax fairness move. At the same time, we'll cut payroll taxes. We'll give a GST rebate to rural Canadians, whereas Dion's plan has a different fund for rural Canadians. So there's differences in the specifics. We'll cut student debt in half. Existing and future student debt is cut in half through the carbon tax holiday, which is made possible through our tax shift. So the details are different. There's no question. We have a much more massive retrofit program. we're the only party, well, I think actually the NDP say they're also against nuclear power, but we also say that, whereas the Liberals have not spoken clearly. And historically, the Liberal Party has been very favorably disposed to losing billions of taxpayers' dollars through bad projects of AECLs. So there are a lot of differences in the specifics, but the fundamental piece is that we must get fundamental action on the climate crisis. And the discussion that I'd like to have with the other leaders is, where do they think levels of greenhouse gases must be arrested to protect Canada for future generations? Is it 400 parts per million? Is it 450 parts per million? Or are they so irresponsible? And I think Mr. Harper's plan would take us into that level, which risks those point of no return, tipping point events, where the planet's climate would simply become uncontrollable. And we don't want to go there, and we don't have much time to avoid that outcome.
I know the Green Party wants to be thought of as more than just a party with policies about the environment, so I do want to ask you about other things. For example, Afghanistan. The Prime Minister has said during this campaign he thinks that when 2011 comes, that's it. What's your view on Afghanistan?
No Canadian lives should be lost in the current mission. The NATO mission is so badly conceived and so misguided. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't take Jack Layton's approach that we should withdraw from Afghanistan suddenly. The people of Afghanistan would experience a humanitarian crisis if the foreign troops all withdrew. On the other hand, the current mission, the airstrikes that are killing civilians, the destruction of the poppy crops, the fundamental corruption of the Karzai government, which doesn't really get examined, these are fundamental flaws in our mission. They were mentioned in the Manley Report, but we need to do far more. I think we need to go back to the United Nations and say the NATO mission, particularly with the overlay of the U.S. government in charge, is perceived as a war against terrorism. In fact, Stephen Harper used those words to describe our mission, which was not why we originally got involved. We went in for rebuilding and for peace and for assistance to rebuild civil society. We need to go to the United Nations and ask for a United Nations peacekeeping mission that engages far more nations than the NATO nations, brings in countries particularly that have a strong Islamic tradition, and we need to ensure that we stop the things that are self-defeating. So regulate, legalize the poppy crop, and deliver pain relief drugs to developing countries, ensure that the Karzai government is rid of those narco warlords who sit on his cabinet, who are really no different from the Taliban in their practices. It's a fundamental shift to what we need is peacekeeping, development assistance, and we may have to stay, but we should not be in Kandahar in a mission against insurgents that is simply doomed to failure.
In our last 30 seconds, let me ask you one more question about voting and voters. Would you urge people to vote strategically insofar as, if the Liberal has a better chance of beating the Conservative in that riding, vote Liberal? If the Green has a better chance, vote Green?
The problem with strategic voting is people really don't know who has a better chance. It's like deer caught in the headlights, and you have some ridings where I think it's quite true that some NDP seats where people thought, oh, I better vote Liberal, they made the mistake of voting for someone who couldn't win and electing a Conservative where they should have voted NDP. It's a mess to talk about voting strategically. So let's be clear, what we have to do is talk about the issues, we have to put forward our policies, and we have to be very clear about the fact that it would be, I think, a large-scale disaster for Canada if Mr. Harper remained as Prime Minister. And I have to trust that the Canadian electorate can figure this out, because it confounds me. The first-past-the-post system is so perverse, and until we get proportional representation, we run the risk of unacceptable results through a democratic process that should deliver what the people really want. So I'll be working and hoping and praying that I figure this out, but in the meantime, I trust Canadians to see the risk of a Harper government and make sure we don't have one.
Elizabeth May, good of you to join us here at TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.